Single strand knots is when the hater natural hair fairy sneaks into your room in the middle of the night and creates these little knots in your hair. That's what it feels like sometimes though. Hi guys, Jennifer here again, and I'm back to talk to you guys about those pesky, annoying single strand knots, otherwise known as pixie knots, one strand knots, fairy knots, peppercorn knots. And just recently I just learned that the scientific term for fairy knots is, wait for it, trichonodosis. Yeah, trichonodosis. But for the sake of this video, we're going to call them fairy knots. I'm not saying trichonodosis for the next 10 minutes. Single strand knots is when one single strand somehow winds itself into a knot, and you wake up or you notice it one day and all of a sudden you have a knot in one strand of your hair. Sometimes it's 2 strands caught in one. On really bad days, it could be 3 or more. Okay, just depending on your situation. Now, also I'd like to say, sometimes it's a single strand knot. Other times it could actually be a split end. Sometimes there are types of split ends that begin on the hair shaft where the hair just begins, where the strand begins to split in the middle, and it looks like a knot, but in fact it's actually a split end forming in the middle of the strand. And I think those are like the worst types of split ends that you can get because you have to cut it right there. So again, sometimes it's a single strand knot. Other times it could be a split end, and I like to think, or it seems to me, you know, based on my observations, it seems that one can kind of beget the other. Like sometimes I feel like a single strand knot can turn into a split end or create a split end or induce a split end, and I think that split ends can create single strand knots or can cause single strand knots to form. Why do single strand knots occur? The number one reason why single strand knots occur is dry hair, which is coincidentally the number one reason why split ends occur. Any type of environment in which your hair is down or the hair strands are creating more friction, rubbing against one another, is an environment that is ripe for single strand knots to occur. Another reason why single strand knots can occur is over manipulation of the hair. Especially if you have kinky hair like mine. If you have a kinkier hair texture like mine, your hair might be more inclined to get single strand knots. As you guys know, some hair textures are more inclined to get single strand knots than others. You guys know that no 2 heads of natural hair are the same. Some people get single strand knots all the time, while others, it's just not a problem for them. They don't get it that much. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just that some people get them more than others. Now, the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that there are some things that we can do to minimize single strand knots. Okay, so it's not a lost cause. Please do not give up. I know that some people, I talk to people who get really annoyed with single strand knots and they just want to give up, because when you're trying to grow your hair out or you're trying to achieve length, single strand knots can be a setback. Even at the beginning of my healthy hair journey, I got single strand knots all the time. I did not know what I was doing wrong, but I did some research. I didn't give up, and I'm here to tell you guys, do not give up. It gets easier. It does get easier. You learn your hair, you learn the tendencies of your hair, and you learn how to avoid them. So there are some things that we can do to minimize single strand knots, ladies and gentlemen. Number 1, alright, the first thing that we can do to minimize single strand knots is what? Moisturize. Alright, the first thing that we can do to avoid single strand knots, the first thing that we can do to minimize single strand knots, minimize is the key word, not avoid, they're gonna come. I mean, yeah, you're gonna see some. Now the degree of which depends on the person, but all naturals will at some point get a single strand knot. They are inevitable, so don't fool yourself. The first way to minimize single strand knots is to deep condition your hair. The drier your hair is, the more inclined it will be to get single strand knots. So you want to deep condition as often as your hair needs it. Number two, a lot of places that I read say that oil rinsing works to minimize single strand knots. I oil rinse from time to time, but I cannot say for certain if that helped me to minimize single strand knots. But I know that there are a ton of sites out there that swear by it. They say, you know, oil rinsing did help them minimize a single strand knot. So that's something that you guys can try. And I think even for myself, I'm going to start paying more attention. Next time I oil rinse, I'm going to actually pay attention to see if I notice a decrease in single strand knots, or to see if it decreases the amount of friction that my hair goes through. So things that worked for me personally when minimizing single strand knots. The first thing that I did to minimize single strand knots was cut out heat. As some of you guys may know, if you've been following my channel for a while, I did a no heat challenge for an entire year. I didn't, you know, one thing that I did notice after straightening, back when I first started my hair, back when I first started my natural hair care journey, when I would flat iron my hair, I would see more single strand knots. So that's one thing that I did notice, and so I decided to cut out heat altogether, including blow drying. After I cut out heat altogether, I noticed a huge decrease in single strand knots. Huge, ladies and gentlemen. And once it was so significant, I just stuck with it. Okay, so less heat, less single strand knots. All right, another common method that people use to keep split ends and Fairyknots at bay is the dusting or trimming method, which involves from time to time just trimming your ends and making sure that you're keeping those split ends minimized, or for the ones that do occur, you stopping them. And it also prevents Fairyknots as well, because when your ends are wild and trashy, if your ends are bad, you will see a lot of Fairyknots, I promise you that. So keep your ends trimmed. As soon as my ends start to look crazy, just chop it right on off, because all a split end will do is just keep on splitting up the hair shaft. I know people say they repair them or whatever. Sure, if you find that you can repair yours, that's great. I just cut it off. Just stop it right there. So yeah. Dust, they call it dusting. Dusting is basically trimming your ends. Next thing that you can do to avoid, or the next thing that I did to avoid getting single strand knots, was I stopped letting my hair get too tangled. If you wear your hair out a lot, or you wear your hair in styles in which your hair is going through a lot of friction, rubbing against one another, you're going to experience more single strand knots. Especially if you have a kinkier texture like mine, that's just the way it is. You can't really avoid it. Okay, so I'm not saying never wear your hair out. I'm saying if you're experiencing a lot of single strand knots, you may want to consider not wearing your hair out as much. The third way you can avoid single strand knots is to be extremely gentle when detangling your hair. I can't stress this enough. How much time should it take to detangle your hair? The answer should always and forever be as much time as it needs to. Okay, now I know we get into a rush sometimes and we have things to do. However, you can't put a time limit on healthy hair. If you have extremely tangled hair or kinky hair that just takes longer to detangle, then that's just what it is. It should always take as much time as it needs to. The more you do it, the easier it gets, I promise. Now, the next thing that you can do to avoid single strand knots is low manipulation of your hair. Decrease the amount of manipulation that you put on your hair and you will decrease single strand knots. Now, I'm not saying that you should never do your hair. I'm saying if you are experiencing a lot of single strand knots, you may want to consider decreasing the amount of manipulation that you are doing to your hair until you can figure out a way to do your hair and avoid knots at the same time. Guys, the next thing that I do to avoid single strand knots is I keep my hair as taut or as stretched out as possible at all times. Now, wash and goes, I do not do wash and goes. I can't do wash and goes. That's just not even in, that's not, I don't do them. After washing my hair, for the majority of the after washing my hair, I stretch my hair out in some way, shape, or form. Right now, it's in these twists, and it's usually in some sort of bun. Sometimes I'll do a twist out if I'm feeling fancy, but I keep my hair stretched out at all times, okay? I can't stress that enough. If you're experiencing a lot of single strand knots, you may want to look into keeping your hair as stretched out as much as possible. Even when I do wear a twist out, like I take my hair out and wear it in a twist out state, I retwist it again that same night. Like I would never sleep on a twist out with my hair out. I would have to retwist it that same night. Your single strand knot's gonna be like, hello, it's me. But yeah. So keep your hair as stretched out as possible. Keep your ends as stretched out as possible to avoid single strand knots. This goes without saying, wrap your hair, ladies and gentlemen, every night. Wrap your hair in a silk scarf or a bonnet every single night. If you go to bed without your hair wrapped and you roll your head around on that cotton pillowcase, you will wake up to breakage and single strand knots. If you're the type of person who forgets to wrap your hair every night, you can invest in a satin pillowcase. I got this satin pillowcase from Target about 2 years ago. It is made by, where is that tag? Where's the tag? There's a tag on here somewhere. It's made by that Evolve, the same brand that made the same. Oh, here it is. Here it is. It is Evolve. Yep. It's made by Evolve. I'm not sure if it's in Target right now. I checked their website. I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not in there. I just kind of saw it on a whim, and I went, oh, wow. So, and I just picked it up on a whim, but I love it. I've had it for 2 years now. It's still soft. It's amazing. So if you forget to wrap your hair every night, invest in a satin pillowcase, and that's something you won't have to remember to do. And last but not least, I know, let's just face it, we all have lives, we all have busy, hectic schedules, we have things to do, we got kids, we have full-time jobs, we get in a rush, and we do forget some moisturizer. Let's just face it, sometimes we don't have time to do a full-on moisturize and seal. We get caught up. What I will say is, even I get busy and I forget to moisturize. When I'm in a rush, when I'm having a crazy day or a crazy schedule, what I'll do is I'll at least get the ends. Okay, that's where the single strand knots primarily occur, that friction at the ends. So what I'll do is I'll just take some moisturizer, put like a dime-sized amount in my hand, rub it together, I'll rub it together, and I'll grab those ends and just, squeeze it into my ends just like this, real quick like, and then if I have, sometimes I'm out the door, but if I have time, I'll throw in some oil, put some oil on top of it, and that way I at least get my ends. So if you're in a rush and you don't have time to do a full-on moisturize and seal, but you know your hair needs it, at least get the ends, or just spray some water on it, throw some oil on top of it really fast, at least get the ends and get on out the door. I didn't see this in a lot of other places, but I noticed that for me, after I did my first protein treatment, I noticed a significant decrease in Fairyknots after that as well. So that may be something to look into. After I started managing the proper amount of moisture in my hair versus the proper amount of protein in my hair, I saw a decrease in Fairyknots after that also. Now, I don't do the traditional protein treatments that I did a year or so ago. I started using the Shea Moisture Anti-Breakage Strengthening Mask to keep the proper amount of protein in my hair, and so this has been working for me currently. If you guys are using any products that are a gentle protein treatment for the hair, please comment them below. I am interested because I do like to switch it up and see what else is out there. So if you aren't doing protein treatments on your hair, that may be some, and you're getting Fairyknots, that may be something to look into. What to do when we get a single strand knots. Single strand knots are inevitable. They will occur from time to time. Have a plan to minimize them, and have a plan of what we're going to do when we get one. Okay, now most people will say as soon as they get one, the first thing that they do is just cut it out, and that is probably what you should do. I, on the other hand, as some of you know, I, on the other hand, will try to salvage it first. I've noticed that a lot of times with my single strand knots, if I look at it and I see a tiny hole in it for which I can get a safety pin through, I will put a safety pin through it and try to salvage the hair. I have salvaged thousands of hairs that way. It can be dangerous. It is risky to do it. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just saying that is what I do. I will try to salvage the hair at first. If I see that it can't be salvaged, then I will cut it out. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you, do not ignore the single strand knot. Attack it. I think I saw on a blog somewhere a while back, someone was saying, you know, I just leave them there. I just ignore them. Do not ignore the single strand knot. The last thing that you want is for a single strand knot to turn into a 2-strand knot, a 3-strand knot, a 5-strand knot, or just one big ball of hair that you now have to cut out. Do not ignore your single strand knot. It will get bigger. They do not go away. Okay, so just want to put that out there for those of you who don't pretend you don't see it. Okay, if you leave it there, it will get worse. Other strands will get entwined into that knot, and in the long run, you're going to have to cut out more hair than you would if you had just cut out that one single strand knot. Okay? Like seriously, if I don't retwist my hair the same night, I'll wake up the next morning, it'll be single strand knot heaven. Like I don't play that. Like I already know. Like I've been working with this beast for a long time. And I know what will happen here. If I sleep on the twist out, I already know what time it is in the morning. Like, just get ready. Where the scissors at? Just get ready. Like, this is, yeah. But I love it. I still love it. I love it, though. You know, that's what I asked for.